I never believed in ghosts. Yeah, I'd hear stories here and there, but they were just that, stories. Until that night, me, Jake, and Emily were sitting around a bonfire, bored out of our minds. That's when Jake brought it up. You guys ever heard of St. Mary's Church? The old one. Past the woods, he asked, his face lit up by the flames. Emily scoffed. Yeah, that place is just an abandoned dump. Jake smirked. No, it's haunted. They say people went in and never came back. Want to check it out? Of course, I laughed it off. Come on, Jake. You expect us to believe that? But the thing is, I love dares. And maybe I wanted to prove him wrong. So, before I knew it, we were headed toward the church. The air felt colder the closer we got, and I swear the trees looked like they were leaning in, like they knew something we didn't. When we reached the church, it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The stone walls were cracked, vines growing through every crevice. The huge wooden doors stood slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. Jake grinned. Ladies first. Emily shoved him. Shut up. Let's just get this over with. And that's when we stepped inside. The air inside the church was thick, like you could choke on it. The pews were all rotting, and the stained glass windows were shattered. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but it wasn't the kind that just collects over time. It felt heavier, like it was waiting for something. Do you feel that? Emily whispered. I did. It was like the building was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a wrong move. Jake pulled out his phone, trying to capture the moment. Guys, look at this, he said, showing us his screen. His phone was glitching, the camera showing weird static, and then nothing. It shut off completely. Great, Jake groaned. No signal, either. I shrugged it off. Let's just take a quick look around and get out of here. No ghosts, no problem. But as we walked down the aisle, something felt off. I glanced at Emily, and she looked as pale as a ghost herself. That's when we heard it. A whisper, soft but clear. Leave. We froze. Did you hear that? Emily's voice trembled. Jake laughed nervously. It's probably just the wind or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Of course, because we were idiots, we decided to keep going. Jake spotted a door near the back of the church. It was half hidden, like it didn't want to be found. Bet that's where the creepy stuff happens, Jake joked. Emily shook her head. No way I'm going down there. I agreed with her, but my curiosity got the better of me. Just a quick look, I said. If it's too creepy, we're out. The basement was worse than I imagined. It smelled like something had died down there. The stone walls were damp, and the steps creaked under our weight. I felt like every step was a mistake, like we were going deeper into something we couldn't get out of. Halfway down, the light from Jake's flashlight flickered, casting shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't have. That's when we saw it. A figure. Tall, dark, standing at the bottom of the stairs, just watching us. Who's there? Jake called out, his voice cracking. The figure didn't move. It just stood there silent. Emily turned and bolted up the stairs, and honestly, I wanted to follow her. But something kept me rooted in place. I needed to know what it was. Jake and I edged closer, and as we got within a few feet of it, the figure just vanished. Like smoke. We should have left right then and there. But we didn't. Emily was losing it. Her breathing was ragged, and she kept pacing back and forth in front of the doors, her hands shaking. We need to leave. We need to leave now. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was thick with panic. Jake tried to calm her down, placing a hand on her shoulder, but it was useless. She was too far gone, and honestly, I didn't blame her. Every inch of me wanted to get the hell out of that place too. All right, let's go, Jake finally said, his voice shaky but trying to sound in control. He marched over to the heavy wooden doors at the front of the church, gave them a good pull, but they didn't budge. At first, he chuckled nervously. Maybe they're just stuck. They've probably been shut for years, right? He pulled again, harder this time, leaning his weight into it. I could hear his sneakers squeaking against the dusty floor as he strained. But nothing. The doors didn't even creak, didn't give a single inch. It was like they were bolted from the other side, or worse, like they were part of the wall itself. Jake, stop messing around, I said, trying to keep my own fear in check. Let me try. I stepped up, pushed against the doors with all my strength, but the same thing happened. Nothing. No give, no sound, just cold, unmoving wood. My hands slid over the rough surface, feeling every splinter and crack, but it didn't matter how hard I pushed or pulled. We were locked in. Panic bubbled up in my chest. I could feel my heart thudding in my ears. I stepped back, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans, and looked at Emily. She was standing there frozen, her eyes wide, staring at the doors like they had betrayed her. "This isn't happening," she muttered, her voice cracking. "This isn't real. It's just some stupid old door. Jake, do something." Jake turned around, his face pale, all the bravado gone. "I don't know what to do. It's stuck." His voice was barely above a whisper now, too. He looked over at me, silently asking for some kind of solution, but I didn't have one. We were trapped, and none of us had any idea why. I took a deep breath, trying to think. "Maybe there's another way out," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "There's got to be another door or a window. Let's check the back." Emily nodded quickly, desperate for anything that felt like an escape. We hurried down the aisle, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the crumbling walls. Jake ran ahead, scanning the back of the church, searching for any sign of an exit. I went the opposite way, heading for the side windows, but as soon as I got close, I could see it wasn't going to work. The windows were small, high up, and covered in iron bars, like whoever built this place wanted to make sure nothing, or no one, could get in or out. Jake tried another door near the back of the church, kicking it in frustration when it wouldn't open either. "What the hell, man? Why won't anything open?" His voice was rising, the panic creeping back in. Emily was standing still now, her eyes darting around like she expected something to jump out at us at any moment. And then, the whisper came again. "Leave." It was louder this time, clearer, but just as unsettling. Like it was right behind us, right in our ears. We all froze. I could feel my skin crawling, every hair standing on end. Did you guys hear that?" Emily's voice was shaking. Jake nodded slowly, his eyes wide. Yeah, I heard it." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. It felt like the church was alive, like it was watching us, playing with us. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the broken windows. It all felt like part of something bigger, something we couldn't see, but was definitely there. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. But deep down, I wasn't sure there was another way out. Jake ran to the far end of the church, trying another door. He slammed into it with his shoulder, but it didn't move either. Emily was crying softly now, standing in the middle of the church with her arms wrapped around herself. The whisper came again, low and insistent. "Leave." I spun around, looking for where it was coming from, but there was nothing, just the rotting pews and the flickering light from Jake's phone. "This is insane," Jake muttered. "There's no way we're stuck. It doesn't make any sense." He kicked a pew, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Emily looked at me, her eyes pleading. "What do we do? What if we're not supposed to get out?" Her words hung in the air, and for a second, none of us said anything. It sounded ridiculous, but the longer we stood there, the more it felt like she might be right. As the silence settled around us, something about the church itself seemed to shift, like the walls were closing in just a little tighter, the air growing thicker. The weight of it was suffocating, pressing down on us with every breath. My mind was racing, but my body felt frozen. We were trapped, and whatever was happening wasn't something we could explain away. This wasn't just an old, abandoned building. There was something wrong here, something alive watching us. Jake was pacing now, muttering to himself, as if trying to figure it all out. "None of this makes sense. We've tried every door, every window. How the hell are we supposed to get out of here?" He ran his hand through his hair, his frustration mounting with every word. Emily was sitting on one of the old, broken pews, staring at the floor, her legs bouncing anxiously. "This place, it doesn't want us to leave." Her voice was low, almost like she didn't want to say it out loud, like saying it would make it more real. I didn't want to admit it either, but the thought had already crossed my mind. Something didn't want us to leave. That much was clear. But why? As I glanced around, my eyes fell on the altar at the front of the church. I hadn't really noticed it before, not with everything else going on, but now it felt like it was drawing me in like a magnet. There was something about it, something off. The surface was covered in a thick layer of dust, but beneath that, I could see strange symbols carved into the stone. Faint but unmistakable. I squinted, trying to make sense of them. Hey guys, I said, pointing toward the altar. Look at this. Jake and Emily followed my gaze. Jake frowned. What is that? He stepped closer, wiping some of the dust away with his sleeve. The symbols were even clearer now. Circles, crosses, and other shapes that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. They seemed ancient, out of place, like they didn't belong in a church. Emily stood up, hesitating for a moment before walking over to join us. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. It's like some kind of ritual, she whispered, her fingers tracing the carvings lightly. Why would this be here? I shook my head. I don't know, but I think this is the key. Maybe these symbols, maybe they're connected to whatever's happening. Jake scoffed, but it was the kind of laugh you give when you're scared out of your mind and trying to hide it. What? You think this is some kind of curse or something? I didn't have an answer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't entirely wrong. The symbols, the whispers, the doors sealing themselves shut. It was all too much to be a coincidence. My gut told me the church wasn't just keeping us in for no reason. There was something here, something dark and old, and it wanted us to stay. Maybe, I hesitated, not sure if I should even say it. Maybe we're supposed to do something with these symbols. Maybe that's the only way we're getting out of here. Emily looked at me like I was insane. What are you talking about? Do something? Like what? Perform some kind of ritual? You can't be serious. Jake shook his head, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't have any better ideas. We were grasping at straws, but it was all we had. I stared at the symbols, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what they meant, but there had to be a reason they were there, a reason they were hidden on the altar. And then, without really thinking, I reached out and placed my hand on the center of the altar, right over the largest of the symbols. The moment my hand touched the stone, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I gasped, pulling my hand back, but it was like my palm had stuck to the surface for a second, like something was holding me there. When I finally yanked it free, the air around us seemed to shift, a low hum vibrating through the walls. The candles that lined the front of the church flickered, though there had been no wind. The faint whispers we had heard before grew louder, more distinct, surrounding us on all sides. Leave. The voice was unmistakable now, deep, almost guttural, as if it came from something ancient and powerful. But it wasn't a warning anymore. It was a demand. Emily backed away, her eyes wide with terror. What did you do? She cried. What's happening? Jake grabbed my arm, his grip tight. We need to get out of here. Now! I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady, though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run. I don't think it wants us to leave yet. What are you talking about? Jake snapped. You heard it? It's telling us to leave. I stepped back from the altar, my mind racing. The whispers weren't just coming from nowhere. They were coming from this. The symbols, the altar, the entire church, it was all connected. And if we didn't figure out how, we might never make it out. I think it's a test, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think it's trying to see if we understand. The symbols, they mean something. We have to figure out what. Emily shook her head furiously, her face twisted with fear. I don't care about the symbols. I just want to get out of here. Jake was still holding my arm, his grip tightening with every second. So what do we do? How do we figure it out? I swallowed hard, looking back at the altar. The symbols seemed to pulse now, faintly glowing in the dim light of the church. My heart was pounding in my chest, the fear almost unbearable. But I knew there was no other way. We had to solve this. It was the only way we'd ever leave this place alive. We have to try, I said, taking a deep breath. We have to finish what was started here, or we're never getting out. The moment hung in the air, thick and heavy with tension. Jake and Emily stood frozen, their eyes darting from me to the altar, then back to the glowing symbols that now seemed alive. The whispers were swirling around us, louder and more urgent, pressing against our minds like invisible hands. My heart was pounding, my body vibrating with fear, but deep down, I knew we didn't have a choice. Whatever was happening, whatever we had gotten ourselves into, we had to finish it. I stepped closer to the altar, feeling the weight of the church pressing in on me. It was as if the entire building was breathing, waiting for our next move. The symbols on the altar pulsed faintly, the soft glow casting eerie shadows across the cracked walls. I could feel the cold seeping into my skin, but there was no turning back now. "We need to figure out what these symbols mean," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "If this is some kind of ritual, then there has to be a way to end it. Maybe we're the ones who need to finish it." Emily's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Finish it? What if we mess it up? What if it gets worse?" Her voice cracked, and she looked at me like I was insane. But deep down, I knew she understood. There was no escaping this place unless we did something. Jake stared at me, his jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. "All right, genius. What do we do? Just guess." I shook my head, staring down at the symbols. "No, it's not about guessing. It's about understanding." My mind raced as I studied the shapes and patterns. They looked ancient, almost like runes, but I couldn't place them. Still, there was something familiar about them, like a story I had heard once but couldn't quite remember. And then it clicked. "It's a balance," I whispered, almost to myself. "That's what this place is about. These symbols, they represent some kind of balance. Life, death, light, darkness. That's why we've been hearing the voices. The church, it's caught in between." Jake shot me a confused look. "What the hell are you talking about?" I turned to him, feeling the weight of realization sink in. This place isn't haunted by ghosts or spirits. It's haunted by whatever was started here a long time ago. These rituals, someone tried to break that balance and it trapped them. Now it's our turn. The church wants us to finish what they started. Emily looked like she was about to pass out. "So what do we do? How do we finish it?" I took a deep breath and reached for the altar again. My hand trembled as it hovered over the largest symbol, the same one that had reacted when I touched it before. We have to restore the balance. That's why it's been telling us to leave. It doesn't want us here because we're disturbing the balance, but we can't leave until we set things right. Without thinking, I pressed my hand down on the symbol. The moment my skin touched the cold stone, a pulse of energy shot through me, like a shockwave traveling up my arm. The glow around the symbols intensified, spreading across the altar like fire. The whispers grew louder, but they didn't sound angry anymore. They sounded relieved. The whole church seemed to shudder, the walls groaning under the weight of whatever force was being unleashed. I could feel the ground vibrating beneath my feet, the air thick with tension. Emily screamed, clutching Jake's arm as they backed away from the altar, but I couldn't move. My hand was stuck to the stone, the energy coursing through me, holding me in place. Then, with a sudden flash of light, the whispers stopped. The glow faded, and the pressure in the air lifted. It was like the church had let out a long, tired breath. The walls stopped creaking, the cold air around us felt lighter, and for the first time since we had stepped inside, there was silence. Jake stared at me, his eyes wide. "Is it over?" I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment lift from my shoulders. The church felt different now, almost peaceful. Whatever had been holding it, whatever had been trapped here was gone. Emily took a shaky step forward. "So, we can leave now?" I glanced around, half expecting something else to happen, but the front doors were standing wide open. The oppressive feeling that had surrounded us since we entered was gone. I nodded again. "Yeah, I think we can." We moved toward the doors cautiously, like we were expecting them to slam shut at any moment, but they stayed open, the cool night air rushing in to greet us. Emily was the first to step outside, and I could see the relief wash over her face as she breathed in the fresh air. Jake followed quickly, and I wasn't far behind. But as I stepped over the threshold, something made me turn back. I glanced at the church one last time, half expecting to see something waiting in the shadows. And that's when I saw it, standing in the doorway, barely visible in the dim light. It was me. My heart stopped. The figure in the doorway looked exactly like me. Same face, same clothes, same expression. It stood there, still and silent, watching me with eyes that were mine but weren't. I blinked, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing, but the figure didn't move. Jake and Emily were already halfway down the path, not noticing what was happening behind them. I wanted to call out, to tell them, but my voice was caught in my throat. The figure, *me*, just stood there, its gaze locked on mine. And then, as if it had never been there, it vanished into the shadows. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, the cold air biting at my skin. I didn't understand what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. A part of me was still in that church,